Hello and welcome to another session of the Hay House 2014 World Summit. My name is Greg Sherwood, and I'm very excited to be one of your guides through this wonderful library of practical and life-changing wisdom. Our guest for this session is Dr. Joe Dispenza. He is an author of the best-selling books Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One, and Evolve Your Brain, the Science of Changing Your Mind. You know, he studied biochemistry at Rutgers University. He also holds a Bachelor of Science degree with an emphasis in neuroscience and earned his Doctor of Chiropractic from Life University in Atlanta, Georgia. He has received postgraduate training and continuing education in neurology, neuroscience, brain function and chemistry, cellular biology, memory formation, and aging and longevity. Now, he's one of the scientists that you may have seen featured on the award-winning film, What the Bleep Do We Know? Now, Dr. Joe has lectured on 6 continents, educating people about the functions of the human brain. He has taught thousands how to reprogram their thinking through scientifically proven neurophysiological principles. Today, we're going to talk about the implications and ideas in his newest book, You Are the Placebo, in which Dr. Dispenza continues his research and discoveries regarding the incredible powers of humans to heal, to change, and reinvent ourselves. Dr. Dispenza believes and has demonstrated that our powers to change and heal our bodies, our personalities, and our sense of well-being extend well beyond what is typically considered possible. With that, Dr. Dispenza, welcome to this Hay House World Summit session.
Thank you, Greg. I'm happy to be with you.
I'm delighted to have you here. Having just read your newest book, You Are the Placebo, I am so excited to share this time with you today, a time that we really like to think of as a master class where people, even people who have maybe been to your sessions or have read some of your earlier books or have spent time with you on the web, will learn some of your thinking, particularly some of the thinking that is currently reflected in this new book. And it is so exciting because I have to tell you, you and I think probably are about the same generation. We're baby boomers, grew up in the very materialistic post-World War II world where ideas like a placebo, you know, the notion of a placebo to me was something like this fake thing that they gave to people to get them to, you know, get better by accident. And you have taken the notion of the placebo, researched it, and come up with an entirely different way to look at the experience of a placebo.
You know, my interest really is showing people that, you know, you don't need to put your faith or belief into a sugar pill or a saline injection or a sham surgery. That if you understand the mechanisms of how the placebo works from a scientific standpoint, and you understand what the physiological changes are, then you can do the exact same thing by thought alone, and that's where my interest is.
Well, this is fascinating to me because obviously those of us brought up in the generation you and I were brought up in, we thought of it as when somebody was given a placebo and actually then affected an increased benefit. They you know, their rash went away or they got rid of their cold or whatever effect it did have on them. We thought that the notion, at least that I grew up with, well, somehow the doctors or the scientists tricked that person into either thinking they were healthy or actually they got healthy somehow magically. But what you're demonstrating in your new book and with the research you've been doing around the country, that there is a method to this, and it isn't magic. It isn't a fake thing. It is a real phenomena.
Oh, absolutely. For example, I mean, just looking at the effects of a placebo with in correlation with depression. I mean, 3 out of 4 people that take a placebo, 3 out of 4 people who take a placebo are told that they're giving an antidepressant. Their brain changes. It's not just in their mind; it's in their brain, and they have benefits as a result of it. So, when you put your faith, belief, and acceptance into something outside of you, and you really expect something to change, by thought alone, you're selecting a possibility that exists another possibility than the typical state of being that you're in. And if you can emotionally embrace that, and it almost happens automatically, by thought and feeling, you move into a new state of being. And for some people, it begins to program their subconscious, and it lasts for an extended period of time.
Well, this is extraordinary because, I would have put, before I read your book and read some of the more recent scientific journals on how the brain works, I would have put the notion of placebo in that realm of this mysterious thing that science can't figure out, like faith healing or the tenets of Christian Science or how, post-hypnotic suggestion works. But you have actually moved this phenomena through your research and your work into the realm of science.
Well, I think science is the contemporary language of mysticism, Greg. I think science begins to demystify the mystical. And if you can begin to take a little bit of science and make it so that people can understand it, it begins to empower them. Knowledge is power, but knowledge about yourself is self-empowerment. So my interest has always been to take these concepts and ideas and show people that they have within their own reach all the neuromachinery and biological machinery to begin to make measurable changes. And if you can begin to give people the right kind of knowledge and they're able to understand it and comprehend it, and then give them some instruction on how to apply it, if they get their behaviors to match their intentions and their actions equal to their thoughts, they get their mind and body working together, they should have some type of transformation or some type of change. And that change then is showing them that they have changed something biologically about themselves by thought alone. And again, the placebo for me is changing your body by thought alone.
Do you think we need a new word now that you've kind of identified the process in which this really does happen? Because in one sense, I kind of feel sometimes the placebo got a bad rap because of the way it's been used by science up until recently. Is there a better word, or should we just get people to change their idea of what a placebo is?
I think changing the idea about the placebo, I think the placebo acts as a step. In other words, if you can relate with the idea of how the placebo works and you can understand what it means, the word placebo means please. And a lot of times when people are given a suggestion by their doctor that they're going to get better and the doctor is enthusiastic about a new medication, that people who feel good, feel better about what they're taking actually get a better result. So it changes their well-being, and they're more open to accept, believe, and surrender without analysis, and that's called suggestibility, to whatever thought or whatever input is being put into them. So then, what do we accept, believe, and surrender to without analysis on a daily basis? In other words, the antithesis of that works also. If someone tells you you have a certain condition and you have a certain time to live, or that you're going to have this condition the rest of your life, and you accept, believe, and surrender to that thought without analysis, then in some way you're programming your subconscious into a very specific line of time. So then, getting beyond our analytical mind and getting beyond the way we have been conditioned, and changing that is where the real work is at, and that's really what our research has been. How do you change a person's state of being so that they can condition their body to a new mind, so they can select different potentials that exist in the quantum field, emotionally embrace them, and if you're no longer expecting the same outcome, but you are, selecting a new possible outcome, and the emotional quotient then gives a signaling mechanism. Your body is getting a taste of the future, and your body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between an actual experience in your life that creates an emotion that you fabricate by thought alone. The body then is actually living in that future reality in the present moment. And if it's done with enough enthusiasm and inspiration, we begin to signal new genes in new ways. And if people begin to assign meaning behind what they're doing, in other words, when you assign meaning to something, you have purpose or intention behind it. Those tend to be the ingredients that make more lasting changes.
And this process that you've identified really does work it works, and you've broken it out with an appreciation for how we create change in our brain, how we get unstuck from the past, move more thoroughly into the present, and thereby have the capacity to shift outcomes in the future. So this is the process. I wish you'd outline it just a little bit for people, because it isn't magical. It is very systematic.
Sure. Okay, let's do it. We think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts that we think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So the same thoughts will always lead to the same choices. The same choices will always lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors will produce the same experiences. And the same experiences create the same emotions. And then those emotions drive our same thoughts. And if we keep doing that enough time, our biology, our neurocircuitry, our chemistry, our hormones, and even our genetic expression is equal to how we think, how we act, and how we feel. So if you keep firing the same thoughts over and over again, and you keep turning on the same circuits in your brain that produce the same behaviors, and the same experiences then keep firing the same patterns neurologically, and the same emotions then continue to condition your body, then for the most part, your brain and body are for the most part living in the past. So now, you keep firing and wiring the same circuits in the same ways, you begin to hardwire your brain to a very finite signature. That box of the brain, that finite pattern, is very limited thinking. And by the time we're 35 years old, the hardwired patterns become part of our identity. It becomes like an automatic computer program. So then, new thoughts should lead to new choices. New choices should lead to new behaviors. New behaviors should create new experiences, and new experiences then should produce new emotions, and new emotions should inspire new thoughts, and that's called evolution. So when we begin to change, when we decide to change from the old self to the new self, the moment we're no longer thinking the same way or acting the same way or living by the same emotions, we start to feel uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. And most people don't like to cross that river of change, because the moment they feel uncomfortable or it feels unfamiliar, they want to rush back to the same thoughts that create the same choices, that produce the same behaviors, that create the same experiences, that ultimately reaffirm the same emotion that feels familiar to them. So then, what we don't know is that when we're in the midst of change, there is a neurological, biological, chemical, genetic death of the old self. And for most people, that crossing that river takes a little bit of effort. They step into a void. They step into the unknown. And they can't predict their pain. They can't predict their disease. They can't predict the next moment. But in actuality, the best way to predict your future is to create it, not from the known, but from the unknown. So we have seen then that when people begin to plan their behaviors, they begin to practice creating a new future, that their brain begins to change to look like the experience has already happened. Now, your brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is a record of the past. So if you're seeing the same people and going to the same places and doing the same things at the exact same time every single day, then your brain is a reflection of your external environment, then for the most part, you're thinking in the past. So getting people to begin to forecast and plan a future and do it enough times so that the brain doesn't know the difference between an experience in their external environment and a change that they're making in their inner world, and then emotionally begin to condition their body to a new mind. If they can combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion, they move from living in the past to living in the future. And it's that repetition that begins to act like taking the placebo every single day. In other words, when people are given a sugar pill or a starch pill and told they're giving a powerful antidepressant, they have to take that antidepressant every day. And it's their belief and their acceptance and their surrendering to what that pill could be doing for them without analysis that begins to make the physiological changes. So we want people then to do the same exact thing, but instead of believing in something that's known, we're asking them to choose something unknown and repeat the process enough times so that the unknown begins to become known. And that's when we start to see more permanent changes in the brain and body.
Well, this is so fascinating, and there's part of it I don't quite understand that I'm hoping you can help tease out for me. This idea that if you get into that elevated emotional state, you have, let's say a more positive expectation for yourself. You're saying that at a subconscious level, or our body or part of our mind doesn't know that this isn't real, that if I imagine where I want to be in the future, or I imagine the feeling I want to have about myself, let's say I want to be more confident or a better musician or whatever, I can actually create in my subconscious the belief that I'm already there.
Well, there's a couple steps that are missing in the process, so let's back up. First of all, let's bring this back to the realm of health, and then we'll step out into something like getting better at playing music. So if you're doing the same things every day, right, and you're waking up and getting out of bed on the same side and brushing your teeth with the same hand and washing yourself in the shower the same way and then grooming yourself in the same way you always do, and you go through this routinized behaviors over and over again every single day, then for the most part, you're expecting the same exact things to occur in your life over and over again based on the last day. As a matter of fact, we can take the last day and place it right over the next day. The majority of your actions would be exactly the same. So what I'm saying is you're expecting unconsciously or subconsciously the exact same thing to be there as yesterday. So that doesn't leave much room for the unknown or the uncommon to happen in our life. So if you can teach a person then, I mean, think about this. There's such great evidence to show that when people are told they're going to get nauseous after their first chemotherapy treatment, that people actually get nauseous on their drive over to their first chemotherapy treatment. In other words, they haven't had the treatment yet, but they're actually in anticipation or in expectation of that first treatment. They're knocking their body at a physiological balance just by thought alone. They're selecting a potential in the quantum field, and there's infinite potential. And as they begin to hold the image in their mind, and they make that thought more real than anything else, from the moment the thought becomes the experience, the end product of an experience is called a feeling or an emotion. So they begin to physiologically embrace that what it would be like, and in a matter of seconds, their body is living in that future. And it begins to cause the body to begin to believe that it's having the experience just by thought alone. So if you can begin to accept the idea that some saline injection or sugar pill could make you better, but instead of believing in the sugar pill, believing in the idea that you could get better without the pill, and then you begin to anticipate the results of it, that your body would move into a new state of being. Why? Thoughts are the language of the brain. Feelings are the language of the body. How you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So instead of the brain and body living in the past, now the brain and body are actually living in a new future. And if you're able to repeat that process enough times, you will begin to change your circuitry, your chemistry, and even your genetic expression just by thought alone. And the research that we did is we now know that it's a skill. The more you practice it, the better you get. Now, it's not that easy as it sounds, because the idea is that we have to recondition ourselves into believing something other than what we typically believe. But with enough practice and enough determination, we've seen enough people heal themselves of MS, of lupus, of high blood pressure, of Hashimoto's syndrome, of cancers, of all different types of health conditions, because they understood the how.
Well, it's interesting because the role of the pill in, let's go back, decades when placebos, well, they're still used in tests for pharmaceutical products. The notion there was if I took a placebo and I was unaware that I was taking a sugar pill, I was given an expectation that this pill will make my migraine headaches go away. I was being fooled into doing what you say we now have to learn how to do consciously, which is say, I can make this change within my own body. I have the power to do that. It is a possibility. You don't have to fool me with a little sugar pill.
Exactly. Let's just take it to the next level. I mean, the research on the placebo, as an example, and I talk about it in the book, one young guy was having a fight with his girlfriend. He was involved in a double-blind, triple-blind placebo study. Triple-blind meaning the people who are participating, who are taking it, the placebo don't know. People who are taking the medication that don't know, and the doctors don't even know who's taking which. So he's involved in a triple-blind study, and he gets in an argument with his girlfriend, and then all of a sudden decides to take the whole entire bottle of the pills. And then the moment he takes all those pills, he goes into a pretty severe reaction. He's choking, and he's breathing in pain, and he's sweating, and his heart is racing, and he thinks he's dying. And so they bring him to the hospital, and they're monitoring everything, and the doctor from the placebo study shows up and informs him that he's taking the placebo. In other words, he thought he was suffering the ill effects of overdose. And just because he thought he was experiencing an overdose, his body responded to his mind. And in the moment the doctor told him that he was taking the placebo, all of the symptoms went away within just a very short amount of time. So it kind of shows both sides. It shows how powerful our thoughts are in affecting our body. But then it also shows how conditioned we are to the ideas of what medication and pharmaceuticals can do for us.
Well, yeah, it seems like I've got much more confidence in, going to the doctor and he or she saying, here, take this pill. It'll get rid of that, the bug you have in your stomach, versus if I went and they said, yeah, you've got a little bug in your stomach, Greg, sit down quietly and, think about getting better and, move through the process that you're suggesting. I mean, you would argue that in one sense, I should have the power to do that on my own, but I'm sort of, because I live with my past experience, I'm sitting there going, I'd rather have a doctor convince me that this little pill is going to fix me, even with all of its side effects and expense. I'd rather, be told that there's some magic in that pill, and for some reason I'm giving up on my own personal power to make the change.
Well, that's okay, because first of all, within the conventional realm of research, Greg, we know that certain placebos work better than others. In other words, there's a lot of evidence to show that placebo reduces pain. That's a fact, and there's a lot of evidence to show that placebos affect autoimmune response conditions as well. So, but we're talking about taking it to the next level. And so, if a doctor is telling you that you have a certain bug and to take this medication, there are many benefits of medications that actually help people get better. But what we're talking about is chronic conditions, or conditions where people have not been getting better. And all of a sudden, by doing some of the techniques that we teach people, they're able to turn the battleship around in their condition. And it may take them a year. It may take them 3 months. It may take them 6 months. It may take them 2 years. Some people it took 2 years. But they understood what they were doing. And once you understand, you see, I wrote the book because I wanted people to understand the science behind it, and we call that assigning meaning to something. If you take a group of hotel maids, and there was an experiment that was done in the southern part of the United States, where they took these hotel maids and they observed them doing all of their activities. They were, moving furniture, flipping mattresses, and vacuuming and scrubbing toilets and floors. And the researchers found that those maids were burning more calories than they were eating. As a matter of fact, they exceeded the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise. So they took these maids and they divided them into two different categories. In one category, they had the maids continue doing what they were doing. In the other category, they sat down with the maids and they said, listen, we're going to tell you the science and the benefits of exercise. We can tell you that it's good for your heart. It could lower your heart rate. It makes you lose body fat. It's going to make you lighter. It's going to make you thinner. You're going to have a smaller waist circumference, and it improves your self-esteem. Now, at the end of 1 month, just 30 days later, those maids were actually, they lost weight, they had a smaller waist circumference, they had greater self-esteem, they had less body fat, because they assigned meaning to what they were doing. So the more you understand the how and the why, the better results that you get. So science is the precursor. The knowledge is the precursor to the experience. So if you teach a person that when they begin to change their state of being, that they are literally signaling new genes in new ways, and you teach them that genes are not destiny, that our genes are turning on and off all the time. The more you change things about yourself, the more your genes change. And when people begin to understand that, and they begin to understand what they're doing in the process, they get greater results. So that's how we close the gap between knowledge and experience. We give people enough knowledge that once they understand what they're doing, and it comes down to the instruction, they have more intention and more purpose behind it, and they get better results. So we're now crossing a greater threshold than just people being healed from pain conditions or autoimmune conditions, or even some of the research that's being done on allergies and with the placebo. We're taking this to the next level, and this level exceeds what most people can even imagine. But I never anticipated it going that way. We just started seeing the results taking place, and we just started following it and measuring it. And I end the book with the idea that we had several events that we did in our workshops where people were getting up from their chairs and saying, "Hey, I've had MS for 20 years, and I was paralyzed in my leg, and I can feel my leg, and I can walk on it." When you start seeing that happen right during the workshops, right during the events, now people are signaling new genes in new ways right during the workshop. So we started measuring with functional imagery. We started measuring their brains with quantitative electroencephalographic readings. We started measuring the energy in the room, the energy centers of their body, the energy field around their body. We started measuring their heart coherence. We started measuring epigenetic changes in their urine. Why? Because it's happening in real time, and we should be able to see what's going on in the brain and body. And it turns out it's not just in their mind. It's in their brain and it's in their body, because they're making real significant changes. And that's when people begin to get excited, because now the conditioning process changes. Because if you see someone dance the salsa well, you'll dance the salsa better. If you see someone hit a tennis ball really well, you'll hit a tennis ball better. If you see someone play a guitar and you play the guitar and you watch them, you'll play the guitar better. If you see someone lead with compassion, you'll lead with compassion better. And if you see someone stand up and talk about the condition that they had and how they changed their state of mind, the challenges they went through in order to overcome it, but they actually did it, you're more prone to actually give yourself permission to do the same. And so my real passion, my real interest is in the how-to. And it's amazing, because you don't have to be an academic, you don't have to be a monk, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to have 1,000 hours of meditation. You just have to be a common person, and it's a skill. Once you know the how, then it gets easy to begin to see changes.
No, it is pretty fascinating. Now, I got to ask you, if we can go back to, I know you didn't do the research with the workers in the hotel that had the drastic difference in outcomes when the one group was given the extra knowledge. What do you think, Joe, what was happening for those women who got the enhanced information and therefore could have the enhanced intention? At a physiological level, assuming, as the test suggests, both groups of women were getting exactly the same, they were burning the same amount of calories, let's say, in the course of a day. How did that information translate into better health outcome? Is it just because the intention creates sort of a quantum possibility that the other group of women didn't have? Do we know what that mechanism is exactly?
No, we don't know what the mechanism is. We can certainly say that if you're doing mindless acts all day long, if you're unconsciously going through all the scrubbing and going through all of the routine actions that you perform on a daily basis, and your conscious mind is not involved, and you're just running a program, then for the most part, your body's going to stay exactly the same because you're unconscious. But the moment you become conscious, the moment you become aware, and the moment you begin to get your attention involved, the more attention you have on what you're doing, the more awareness you have. And it seems that when you have more awareness in what you have, what you're performing in the moment, the more present you are, your body begins to respond to your mind. And it's only in the present moment, when you are aware and you're conscious, that you have access to other possibilities. And we now know, without a doubt, we saw this over and over again in our brain scans, that when people are truly present and they're really doing it properly, their brain changes dramatically.
Well, this is so fascinating, and yet I remember watching something where in the course of explaining some of your work, you said, a lot of people, as you've just described, a lot of us spend the time largely reliving our past habits, our past, just exercising one more day, just like the last. And you said something in the course of one thing that I watched where you said, people get pretty happy at times being unhappy. Does that go back to what you were saying earlier, where there's so much fear or discomfort with the new that we would rather it's like the old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know? Are we just as human beings sort of thrown back on that habit of mind?
Absolutely. That's 100% the way it is. And now think about this. Feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences. And you can remember experiences better because you can remember how they feel, which means that when you're in the midst of an experience, all of your five senses are picking up all this vital data and it's sending information back to your brain. It causes the brain circuitry to reorganize itself, but then it makes chemicals to make you feel a certain way. So if you're feeling the same way every single day, then it means two things. Nothing new is happening in your life because a new experience should create new emotions. And secondly, if you are living by the same emotions every day, then your body is basically in the past because your body as the unconscious mind is believing that it's in the same experience all day long. So people begin to become familiar with that comfort zone. And if you were asked to trade that emotional state for something else, they would have to be able to predict what it is. Well, what is it going to be? Well, the problem is you have to bring that up on your own. So most people don't want to step out into the unknown. So they'll stay with their guilt, stay with their pain, they'll stay with their shame, they'll stay with their unworthiness because at least they can predict that. Absolutely. We've seen that. But it always takes crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis or loss for people finally get to the point where they realize they have to change. My message is why wait? Why don't we do it now, and why don't we just do it without having to get to that level?
Well, see, there's the rub, though. You made such a great point because most of the people I know who have broken through to these higher levels of appreciation and awareness for what capacities they have as a human being, like you did when you had your own personal physical challenge when you came off that bicycle years ago. That was a crisis. You met it and made some phenomenal healings and changes in your own life, and it's precipitated all the great work you've been doing. So, and other people who have gotten to crisis points have had the same experience. Is it again just human nature that we are so adverse to that realm of the unknown that it does typically take something sort of horrifying or a medical crisis to bring us to the point of waking up to a different way of living within our bodies and thinking about our own potential?
Well, I think in order for us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And when you are knocked to a lower denominator, there's something quite unusual that happens. You don't feel like yourself any longer. And the moment you don't feel like yourself any longer, it's because you no longer are yourself. And that's the moment you can see yourself through the eyes of someone else. You can see yourself from a different vantage point. In other words, if you're so busy being unconscious to who you are, you never really know who you are until all of a sudden something strikes you. You don't feel like yourself anymore. You can see yourself for the first time. And that's when people start to look at the thoughts that they've been thinking. They start paying attention to the behaviors and habits. They start looking at the emotions that they've been living by every single day and asking themselves if it's loving to them or if it serves them, or do these states of mind and body belong in my future? So it's a very interesting concept because when people get that intentional, in other words, when they make a decision with such firm intention to change in that moment, that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in their brain and the emotional addictions in their body, then their body and brain begin to respond to a new mind. The moment that occurs, they begin to signal the body to no longer be in the past because The choice is an experience that they never forget. Now, experience produces emotion, and emotions are energy. So when they make a choice that's so profoundly intentional that the choice becomes an experience, that's the moment now they pull their brain and body out of the past. And it has to be greater than any trauma of the past. And the body has to come out of the resting state. When we do this properly, that's the moment we start to see biological changes.
Now, does it require, let's say because you had a challenges in your childhood, you had broken homes or alcoholic parents or whatever, and so you built up a lot of self-esteem issues and were struggling with lots of personal, lack of self-worth. Whether you come to a medical challenge or you come to one of your sessions and suddenly generate that energy, that desire, that intensity where you want to make that crossing of the river. Do you have to, in a Freudian sense, also be aware of what all that created the limitations that you put on yourself, or is it enough to observe, as you just said, you look at yourself, you see the emotions that haven't been serving you, and the self concept that hasn't been serving you, and without necessarily knowing how you got it, you know that you've had it for 30 years, you don't want it anymore, and you get on with taking the big bold step to become a bigger and better than that?
Well, the answer is you definitely do not have to analyze your life.
Okay.
You don't have to analyze your past. Now, here's the reason why. And we saw this when we studied people in the midst of change. In other words, when we did our advanced workshops where we were actually teaching people how to do this and we were looking at their brain, we now know that you cannot use your brain to change your brain. You cannot use the program that you are to change your program. You can't use the ego to change the ego. Matter does not change matter.
It's sort of like what Einstein said, you can't use the science that got you into the problem to figure your way out of the problem.
Absolutely. That the only way that you can change your brain and your body is by thought alone, is to become pure consciousness. So think about this. The feelings and emotions are the end product of past experience. And that experience from the past has branded you emotionally. And you're trying to figure out the reason. And you're examining or thinking about it within that emotion. Then you're thinking about it in terms of the past. Because if you can't think greater than how you feel, or feelings become the means of thinking, then you are literally thinking in the past. And most people who are analyzing their life within the emotion that they've memorized will never come up with the solution because the answer exists outside that emotion. So now, the moment the person breaks free from the chains of that emotional addiction, and they're no longer anchored to the past, they see a whole new landscape. They see a whole new possibility because they're not viewing their life through the lens of the past. And a memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. So we always say, never mind the experience that created the emotion. Let's just work on the emotion. Once you get beyond that emotion, without a doubt, you will have the answer that always existed. And we saw this, and I talk about it in one of the chapters of You Are the Placebo. There's a thing called suggestion or auto-suggestion. You only accept the thought that you're thinking equal to how you're feeling. So if you're feeling frustrated, you'll only accept thoughts that are equal to your state of frustration. If you're feeling suffering or victimization, you will only think thoughts and accept, believe, and surrender to those thoughts without analysis equal to that emotional state. By the same means, you won't accept, believe, and surrender certain thoughts that aren't equal to that emotion. So health, wealth, freedom, if you're feeling lack, unworthy, and insecure, the thoughts won't be equal to that emotional state. Change a person's emotional state and move them into a new state of being, and they will always accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts equal to that emotional state, and they'll no longer believe in those voices that once were taking place in their head because they're no longer thinking in the past. Now, we just did an advanced workshop just last week with over 325 people from all over the world, and we saw people move into new states of being, and they literally, well, 100%, their disease no longer existed. Why? Because their disease belonged to the old personality and no longer to a new personality. We had a physician from Vancouver, Canada, who had serious skin condition. He took cortisone every day, smeared it all over his face, all over his neck. It was an allergic reaction that somehow stayed with him. And he was diagnosed by a dermatologist, and he had to take medication. And he had his own personal breakthrough in the event. And he woke up the next day. His skin would peel every day, and he woke up the next day. He had no rash. He had no skin peeling. He didn't take his medication, and he was more surprised than anybody. But he realized that he wasn't the same person any longer, and that the condition existed to the old person. And I said to him, "Well, what if the psoriasis starts to come back, and the dermatitis starts to come back?" And he said, "Well, then I would be returning back to the old self again." I said, "Exactly. So you have to take the placebo every day. What does that mean? You have to move into a state of being every single day."
So do you think that energetic, is it a function of that now you got that group of people, and with that specific example of the doctor, they've moved to a different energy level? So they actually have become energetically a different person?
Well, there's energetic components, there are emotional components, there are behavioral components, there are attitudinal and thought components. But for the most part, when we have people make those kind of shifts, there is the energetic component that really is the key part, is the epiphenomenon of matter. So if, from a quantum perspective, energy affects matter. So a person who moves into higher energetic states, and we measured this many times, they're able to control their brain and body better because they're more energy and less matter. When we live, for the most part, by the hormones of stress, and we feel angry and hateful and judgmental and insecure and fearful and unworthy and guilty and shameful and sad, depressed, those emotional states are lower energy states, so we feel more like matter and less like energy, and it becomes difficult to change our brain and body because from a quantum perspective, we're vibrating at the same speed as matter. But when people start to elevate their energy, they begin to become more lifted, then they can exert more effort or produce greater results not only on their body, but at times on things in their life. So getting people into that energetic state, of course, is the challenge.
Okay, and that's sort of the $64,000 question. I think can you share with us, I know it's a process that you do with people over the course of many days, but can you just, because right now, I think anybody listening like myself as well, how does that work? How do I get from where I am now to that higher energetic space so I could maybe make some of these changes for the better? What is the process? I mean, I know it's an unfair question. I can't make it a yes or no question, but could you give people at least a sense of what it takes to move from the habit of our minds of living our days like they were the days in the past? What is it that breaks us through? What steps do you take when you have these people in the advanced classes? What are they spending their time doing?
Well, the first thing that we have them do, Greg, is they have to retreat from their life for at least 3 or 4 days. Now, why do they have to retreat from their life? Because they have to remove the constant stimulation in their external environment that reminds them of who they think they are as a personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So then, if they're returning to their life and reacting to their environment, in other words, their environment is controlling how they think, and they see the same people and go to the same place and do the same things at the exact same time, then their personal reality is creating their personality. Even when they look in the mirror, even when they see their friends, even when they drive their car, they're reminded of their same state of being. So people have to retreat from their life long enough to begin to forget about their life. In other words, if you want to change your body, you have to forget about your body. If you want to change your life or your reality or your environment, you have to forget about your environment. If you want to create some future time that's different than the predictable time, you literally have to forget about time. So we use the model of meditation as one of the great ways to do that, because when you do a meditation, you're disconnecting from your environment. You're disconnecting from your body, your identity, your faith, your profession, your sexual preference. You're disconnecting from the predictable future and the familiar past. And when we study people and we watch their brains, when we become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time, when you become a thought impossibility, the moment you get to that level, that's the moment we start to see the most important changes. In other words, if you're going to change something about yourself by thought alone, then you have to become thought alone. So we have people retreat from their life, and the first day is always about looking at yourself. You have to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts. You have to pay attention to your unwanted behaviors, your beliefs, your perceptions, your attitudes. You have to begin to look at your emotions. And, of course, this first day is always a challenging day because this is where you have to get beyond yourself. Without a doubt, in the years that we've been doing the research, we know that when people get beyond themselves, they do the miraculous. They do the uncommon. And that first day is always the challenge because you're trying to disentangle yourself from your habits of thought and your habits of action and your habits of emotion or addiction. So once a person begins to traverse that terrain, then we have them begin to move into new states of being. In other words, you and I have been hypnotized and conditioned into believing that we need a reason for joy, that we need a reason for gratitude, to give thanks. We need a reason to feel love. That's cause and effect. Something outside of you changes something inside of you. You'll pay attention to whatever caused it outside of you, and you'll decide if you like it or don't like it. But the quantum model of reality is about causing an effect. It's about moving into states of being before the event has occurred. So then, if you're living in a state of gratitude because you feel you're in love with life or you love your life, your body is the unconscious mind, is believing it's in that future in the present moment. And gratitude means the event has already happened. If you want to feel empowered because you want to be successful, don't wait for your success to be empowered. Become empowered so that you begin to draw success to you. If you want a loving relationship because you want to feel love or you want to feel nurtured, well then if you're waiting for the relationship to feel that, then you're thinking in the old model of reality. If you begin to embrace love and nurturing before the event has happened, your body as the unconscious mind begins to believe it's in that future. And if you're able to do that enough times, you're giving your body a sampling or a taste of the future. So we move people from their past self, their past states of being, into new states of being, and we keep driving them further and further into more elevated states. And it's almost like they all of a sudden come back to their senses, and it seems like the disease has disappeared. They don't know how it happened or when it happened, but all they know that it did happen. And when we measured people's brains when they were doing this, we saw that they could not voluntarily do what they did to their brain in their conscious state. They have to get beyond their conscious mind, get beyond their analytical mind, and that's the purpose of meditation, and enter into the operating system where those subconscious programs exist and reprogram them. And the brainwave patterns that we captured in a lot of people that did this properly, the amplitude was so intense in the brain that the inner experience that they were having was way more real than any past experience. In other words,
Wow.
Their trauma, their abuse, their conditions from their past that kept defining them. When the inner experience was that profound, it was like it rewrote the program in that moment, and that's when the past no longer exists. We've seen it so many times now.
Now, is that a typical experience, or for those of us who haven't had a chance to be in one of those advanced sessions, can we, in an incremental way, work to make some of these changes, or does it really require us to physically get out of our world for a few days and at least at one point to begin the shift towards changing some of these lifelong limiting patterns?
Well, and we can do it without coming to an advanced workshop at any time. I mean, that's why I wrote You Are the Placebo, to give people the tools on how to do that. But if you woke up in the morning, instead of getting up and doing the same routine thing that you always do and go to the same place and see the same people, you woke up in the morning and you decided who you wanted to be before you opened your eyes, and what thoughts you do want to pay attention to, and what behaviors you do want to demonstrate, and what emotions you're going to live by, and begin to review how you're not going to think, how you're not going to act, and how you're not going to feel, and get up as a different person in a new state of being. And then maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day. That's the job here, by the way, to sustain that change. You should begin to see some effects take place in your life. That's the quantum law of reality. So it's a simple process, but to get really good at it, the hardest part of it is making the time to do it every day. That's the hardest part. And people who actually do it get the best results.
And you have seen, I know that in the book you mentioned that the best time of the day for people to do this, not surprisingly, is at the very beginning of the day or at the very end of the day, where they can actually have some time alone, a little that you can kind of carve out some space away from it all.
Yeah, we like the morning and the evening because your brain waves are in the perfect state. When you wake up in the morning, your brain waves are in a more suggestible state, and when you go to bed at night, your brain waves are in a more suggestible state. So you don't have to work as hard. In the middle of the day, your brain pretty much is in what's called beta brainwave patterns, and most of your attention is on your outer world. When you're waking up and you're still a little groggy, you're between the dream world and the real world, that's a great time to do it, because if you did it in the morning, you can prime your brain and prime the right circuits, like priming a pump, priming the right circuits you want to turn on, and begin to prime the body emotionally so that it's beginning to you're getting those circuits activated first. So it's a good way to do it in the morning or before you go to bed at night. And you want to get your brain and body right before you go to bed as well. It's also a good time. But we've seen when people begin to do it in the morning or the evening, they get the best results.
Now, we obviously don't have the time or space to do a meditation here, but you do have practices on your website, and there are ways for people to, or is it enough? If let's say somebody already has a meditative practice and they've got a habit of doing it from, and it comes out of whatever tradition it comes out of, is there a way to incorporate some ideas, some thoughts, is there a way to retune it so it becomes more effectively or leads toward the outcomes that you're suggesting?
I think people who have experience in meditation, I think they'll probably do very well. I think that, again, if you start specifying what you're doing in the meditation, if you assign meaning behind it, you get better results. And so people who do meditations and they're moving into new states of being, they're making genetic changes. People who understand that they're making genetic changes during meditation, Hay House has meditations now that they offer as well. So I think it works. I just know that it works.
So the trick is, though, to even whether you're practiced at doing meditation or you're a newbie, when you get into that practice, it's to add this creating an intention towards moving in this direction. You say we all have the power to go.
Oh yeah, we're moving into that direction, and just like a skill, anything you learn, the more you practice, the better you get at it. That's the bottom line. And our students that are consistent in our work, I mean, they move into these states in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 9 seconds, because they practice it so many times that they know when they're there and when they're not. So when we measured that in our functional scans brain-wise, neuroscientists were pretty impressed because they said, wow, they can drop their identity very quickly. So every day, if you're practicing that and you're getting beyond yourself and you're moving into the present moment, you should be able to develop that skill, and that's what we want for everybody.
So essentially, that what you're observing is those very skilled at it, and all of us, if we practice as you suggest, we're essentially letting go of both the concerns of the day and sort of our existing ego constructs, so we can observe the world and the potential without the clutter of that mind.
I would say that when you dissociate from your body, in other words, when you forget that you have a body, when you forget that you have a face, or you go from somebody to nobody, from someone to no one, and you go from something to no thing, when you go from somewhere to nowhere, you go from sometime to no time. You get to that point where you're completely dissociated from your body, your environment, and time. That's the moment you have the ability to affect your body, your environment, and time. And we have all the biological and neurological machinery to do this. It's just a question of learning how.
Well, I'll tell you that those images that you have in the back of your new book, where you've actually taken pictures of people's brains, are pretty extraordinary, and they do show an extraordinary shift. It's really fascinating. I mean, so much of what you're doing now has been made possible, at least the observation of it, because of all of this new technology where we can essentially look into people's brains and see what they're up to.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's so exciting. I mean, I love seeing that because you can begin to understand how to teach it better, and that's what I'm after. And I know now that if you're analyzing your life and you're analyzing yourself, your brain is going to move further out of balance. There's no doubt about it. We see it over and over again. It's only when you stop the analytical process and you move into a new state of being that you're actually in those subconscious programs. So you look into the brain and you say, why is this person working so hard? And why is their brain getting worse? And you talk to them and they're struggling. It's because they're thinking too much. But they're thinking and they're frustrated and they're impatient. And it's their impatience and their frustration that's driving their brain and body further out of balance. I mean, you can teach them how to slow that down. They're taming the beast. They're sedating the animal, which is the body. And if you keep practicing that enough time, sooner or later you begin to start the reconditioning process. The body starts to surrender. And that's when the body starts to trust you when you take it for a test drive.
Well, that's interesting because I didn't know in the book you were talking about there is as you were just saying, there is this. Some of us just try too hard, right? We're trying, but it's because we're trying with the wrong tools. If I understand you correctly,
that's what I mean when I say you can't use the program to change the program, or you can't use the ego to change the ego. That when you do that, things actually get worse.
I know. Well, I can think of 100 different arguments I've had with myself about failures of my own, being where one part of me has been arguing with the other part and nobody wins, right?
Yeah, and you're exhausted afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. It's very frustrating. And yet, you seem to, without another option, to continue forever to have those, arguments within that self-talk that is sort of just a constant circular argument. And so you're saying there is a way out, and but it requires getting into this different state, getting to the no body, nowhere, no thing space where you have a lot more room to maneuver.
Well, I mean, we do it all the time. The brain naturally does this. You're driving down the road in your car and you're staring out the windshield and you're driving on the freeway and you just drove 45 miles and you didn't feel your body. You didn't even see the road in front of you. There was no environment. There was no time. You lost track of time and space. So in order for you to affect reality in this time and in this space, you have to get beyond this time and this space, and you have to go into no time and no space. That's the quantum world. That's where you begin to become most impressionable in your observation.
Well, I think your book makes a great argument, as you have just in the last hour. We're getting down to the last few minutes of our time together, Dr. Dispenza. And I've just got to go back to something you said at the very beginning, because when I read the book, it was one of the lines that just knocked me out. And I'm just wondering, when you wrote it or when you came up with this idea, did you have any idea of how powerful this notion is? As you stated, science is the contemporary language of mysticism. To me, you're bringing together two worlds, the world of religion and Descartes, reality and spirituality. This seems to be, we're at a nexus here, and that phrase describes something that's profoundly new and exciting to me.
Well, I'm a pragmatist, Greg, and I'm really interested. If I'm going to learn information, I'm not the person that's going to leave it up to conjecture or dogma. I want to be able to apply it, and I think this is a time in history. It's so exciting because this is a time in history where people just don't want to know. They want to know how, and thank God we're moving out of that philosophical realm We're actually initiating knowledge. We're initiating philosophy. And if you're able to initiate and apply philosophy enough times, you're going to begin to master it. So you go from philosopher to initiate to master. And science tends to be inclusive. It tends to form community. The moment you talk about tradition or culture, religion, you divide an audience. But science tends to unify. So if you can take a quantum model of reality, understand how the brain and the mind work, you can understand neuroendocrinology and your emotions and feelings and psychoneuroimmunology and how it affects your immune system. And if you begin to understand how you signal new genes in new ways, and you tie those all together, you have a model for people to say, I think I can do this. And the moment they start to think that they can do it, it begins the journey for them.
Well, it's incredibly exciting. I hope the last hour with you has been as challenging and rewarding for our listeners as it has been for me. Dr. Joe Dispenza, thank you for your time. Thank you for your good work. And I look forward to lots more exciting research and revelations coming from you in the years and decades ahead. Thanks so much for your time, Joe.
Thank you, Greg, for all you do.
Great fun. And thank you for listening in to this edition, another session of the Hay House 2014 World Summit.
Thank you for spending time with us during the 2014 Hay House World Summit. Our goal is to offer you original content that is inspiring and uplifting. We hope you continue to include us in your journey of living your best life.